Ellie had always traveled for work. This time, she had an assignment just outside the city. It was a small town, the kind where everyone knows everyone. The company booked her a week-long stay at an Airbnb. The pictures online showed a cozy, rustic house owned by a friendly-looking older man named Walter. She arrived on a Monday evening. Walter greeted her with a wide smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. The house was exactly as advertised, warm and welcoming. Walter gave her a quick tour, showing her the kitchen, living room, and her bedroom. "Feel free to make yourself at home," he said, his voice smooth and comforting. "I'll be around if you need anything." The first night was uneventful. Ellie unpacked, had a light dinner, and watched some TV before going to bed. She noticed a small camera in the corner of the living room, but assumed it was for security. She shrugged it off and went to sleep. The next morning, Ellie woke up early for work. She got ready and headed out, not noticing Walter watching her from the window. Throughout the day, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She dismissed it as nerves from being in a new place. When she returned that evening, Walter was waiting for her on the porch. "How was your day?" he asked, his eyes too focused, too intent. "Good, thanks," Ellie replied, feeling a bit uneasy. She went inside and tried to relax, but that feeling of being watched lingered. She noticed another small camera in the kitchen, this one cleverly hidden among some knickknacks. She started to feel uneasy, but told herself it was just for security. That night, Ellie had trouble sleeping. She kept hearing strange noises, creaks, and whispers that made her skin crawl. She got up to get some water and noticed another camera, this one in the hallway leading to her room. Her heart started to race. Why would Walter ever need so many cameras? The next morning, she decided to confront him. She found Walter in the garden, humming a tune. "Hey Walter," she began, trying to keep her voice steady. "I noticed you have a lot of cameras in the house." Walter's smile faded slightly, his eyes narrowing. "Oh, those? Just for security, dear. You never know what kind of people might come around." Ellie nodded, not entirely convinced. She went back inside and decided to search the house. She found more cameras in the bathroom, the bedroom, even the closet. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized Walter had been watching her every move. She grabbed her phone and called the police, but the call wouldn't go through. No signal. Panic set in. She needed to get out of there. She packed her things as quickly as she could, trying to stay quiet. As she reached the front door, it swung open. Walter stood there. His face formed into a sinister grin. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, blocking her path. Ellie tried to push past him, but he grabbed her arm, his grip iron tight. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed. "You're mine now." Ellie struggled, but Walter was too strong. He dragged her back into the house, locking the door behind them. He pushed her into a chair and tied her hands with rough rope. "I've been watching you," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're perfect, just perfect." Tears streamed down Ellie's face as she realized the horror of her situation. Walter had been watching her, planning this. She was trapped. Days passed. Ellie was kept in the house, watched constantly by Walter and his cameras. She lost track of time, her only goal to survive. She tried to escape several times, but Walter was always one step ahead. One night, as Walter slept, Ellie managed to free herself from the ropes. She crept through the house, careful not to make a sound. She found a window and climbed out, running into the darkness. She didn't stop until she reached a nearby town, where she collapsed, exhausted and terrified. The police were called and Walter was arrested. They found his house filled with tapes and recordings of countless women, all taken from his hidden cameras. Ellie was just one of many victims, but she was the only one who ever escaped. To this day, Ellie can't shake the feeling of being watched. She moved to a new city, changed her job, and tried to start over, but the scars of that week stay with her. Every creak, every whisper reminds her of Walter and his psychopathic obsession. Grace and Zoe had been looking forward to their trip for weeks. Two best friends on a much-needed vacation, they rented a secluded Airbnb near Las Vegas, hoping to relax and enjoy the desert's stark beauty. The house was perfect, a modern design nestled against the mountains with large windows that let in plenty of natural light during the day and provided breathtaking views of the night sky. They arrived late in the afternoon, and after a quick tour of the house, they unpacked and settled in. The first evening was spent laughing, reminiscing, and planning the next day's adventures. They went to bed feeling content, not knowing that someone was watching them. The man had been tracking them since they left the city. He had seen them at a gas station and followed them, keeping a safe distance. The secluded location of their Airbnb made his task easier. No one would hear them scream out here. As night fell, the desert silence enveloped the house. Grace and Zoe slept soundly, unaware of the danger lurking outside. The man watched from a distance, studying the layout of the house and noting the best points of entry. He knew how to be patient. The next morning, the girls woke up early, eager to start their day. They spent the afternoon exploring nearby trails and taking pictures. By the time they returned, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert floor. They didn't notice the man watching them from behind a cluster of rocks. That night, after a light dinner, they decided to watch a movie. Halfway through, Zoe realized she had left her phone charger in the car. She asked Grace to pause the movie and went outside to retrieve it. The darkness was thick, and the only sound was the crunch of her footsteps on the gravel driveway. As she reached the car, she felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck, like she was being watched. She brushed it off as paranoia and quickly grabbed her charger. But as she turned to head back to the house, she heard a noise, a soft rustling, like footsteps. She spun around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. "Grace?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. She hurried back inside, locking the door behind her. "Did you just come outside now?" she asked Grace, trying to keep her voice steady. Grace looked puzzled. "No, I've been right here. Why?" Zoe shook her head. "It's nothing, let's just finish the movie." But the feeling of being watched stayed with her. She tried to ignore it, but every creak and groan of the house made her jump. Grace noticed her unease but didn't say anything. She didn't want to make things worse. Later that night, after Zoe had gone to bed, Grace stayed up reading. She was just about to turn in when she heard a noise from outside, a soft scraping, like something being dragged along the wall of the house. She froze, listening intently. The sound came again, this time from near the front door. Heart racing, she crept to the window and peeked through the curtains. At first, she saw nothing, but then, in the dim light of the porch, she saw a shadow move. It was quick, barely a flicker, but it was enough to send her heart into overdrive. She rushed to Zoe's room and shook her awake. "Zoe, I think someone's outside." Zoe sat up, groggy and confused. "What? Are you sure?" "I saw something. We need to call the police." They grabbed their phones, but to their horror, neither had a signal. The Wi-Fi was also down. Panic set in as they realized how isolated they were. "We need to get out of here," Grace said, her voice shaking. "We can drive to the nearest town and call for help." Zoe nodded, still half asleep but understanding the urgency. They hurriedly dressed and packed their essentials. As they made their way to the front door, they heard a loud crash from the back of the house. Someone was inside. Grace and Zoe bolted for the front door, but as they reached it, the man appeared, blocking their exit. He was short but looked strong, with crazy pale eyes that gleamed with evil. He grinned, revealing yellow teeth, and took a step toward them. They screamed and ran in opposite directions, desperate to escape. Grace darted into the kitchen, grabbing a knife for protection. Zoe ran upstairs, hoping to find another way out. The man followed Grace, his heavy footsteps echoing through the house. She hid behind the kitchen island, clutching the knife and trying to steady her breathing. The footsteps grew louder, closer. She could hear him muttering to himself, his voice low and menacing.
"Where are you, little rabbit?"
Grace's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she had to stay quiet, stay hidden. But then, the footsteps stopped. The silence was deafening. She risked a peek over the counter and saw him standing in the doorway, staring right at her. He lunged and Grace screamed, slashing wildly with the knife. She caught his arm and he screamed in pain, but it only seemed to fuel his rage. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it until she dropped the knife, and shoved her to the floor. Upstairs, Zoe heard Grace's scream and felt a surge of fear. She had to help her friend. She looked around frantically and spotted a heavy lamp on the nightstand. Grabbing it, she crept downstairs, heart in her throat. She found Grace and the man struggling in the kitchen. Summoning all her courage, she swung the lamp at the man's head. The impact sent him sprawling, dazed but not out. He turned his wild eyes on Zoe, fury etched into his face. Grace took advantage of the distraction, scrambling to her feet. "Run, Zoe!" she shouted, and they both bolted for the front door. They made it outside, but the man was right behind them, faster than they had anticipated. He tackled Zoe, and they both went down in a heap. Grace turned back, panic-stricken, and grabbed a large rock from the ground. With all her strength, she brought the rock down on the man's head. He crumpled, finally unconscious. Breathing heavily, Grace helped Zoe to her feet. They didn't waste any time, rushing to the car and speeding away from the house, hearts still pounding with fear. They drove straight to the nearest town, where they finally called the police. Authorities arrived at the Airbnb and arrested the man, who had a long history of stalking and violence. Grace and Zoe were shaken but grateful to be alive. Their vacation had turned into a nightmare, but their friendship and quick thinking had saved them. As they left Las Vegas behind, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often, Grace and Zoe still feel a chill when they think back to that Airbnb. They never found out how long he had been watching them before that night, or why he had chosen them. They knew they would never forget those terrifying nights in the desert, nor the man who had turned their dream vacation into a horror story they would tell for years to come. Madison and Leo had been looking forward to their vacation for months. They found a charming little cabin on a serene lake through Airbnb, and it seemed perfect. The photos showed a cozy, rustic retreat surrounded by thick woods and calm waters. It was exactly what they needed to escape their hectic city lives. The owner, Roger, had glowing reviews. Guests praised his hospitality and the cabin's peaceful setting. Madison and Leo were sold. They booked it for a week, eager to enjoy some quiet time together. The drive to the cabin was long but beautiful. Winding roads cut through dense forests, and the couple marveled at how remote the area felt. They arrived just as the sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the lake. Roger was there to greet them. He was an older man, maybe in his late 50s, with graying hair and a friendly smile. His eyes, however, were cold and calculating, but Madison and Leo didn't notice. They were too excited about their vacation.
"Welcome. I'm Roger. You must be Madison and Leo,"
he said, extending a hand.
"I hope you'll find everything to your liking. If you need anything, just call me. I live nearby."
He showed them around the cabin, pointing out the amenities and giving them a few tips about the area. There was a slight unease in the way he lingered over certain details, but the couple brushed it off as just his way of being thorough. That night, Madison and Leo settled in, enjoying the quiet and the sound of the lake lapping against the shore. But as they were about to drift off to sleep, they heard a noise outside. It sounded like footsteps, slowly creeping around, crunching on the gravel path. Leo got up and peeked out the window. He saw nothing but darkness and the faint outline of the trees. "It's probably just an animal," he said, trying to reassure Madison, though he felt chills run through his body. The next day was uneventful. They spent the day exploring the area, hiking through the woods, and swimming in the lake. But as night fell, the feeling of unease returned. They heard the footsteps again, closer this time. Madison's heart raced. "Leo, I'm scared," she whispered. "It's okay, we're safe inside," he replied, trying to sound confident. The footsteps continued for a while before stopping abruptly. They didn't sleep well that night, and in the morning they found strange marks on the windows, like someone had been pressing their face against the glass. They decided to call Roger, but there was no answer. The day passed slowly, filled with a growing sense of dread. They kept the doors locked and stayed inside, jumping at every little sound. As night fell once more, there was a noticeable tension in the air. They heard the footsteps again, and this time they were accompanied by a low, menacing laugh. Madison and Leo huddled together, their fear turning to panic. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. Madison screamed, and Leo fumbled for his phone to use as a flashlight. The light revealed a figure standing at the window, grinning at them. It was Roger. His face was twisted into a horrifying smile, his eyes wild with madness.
"I hope you're enjoying your stay,"
he said, his voice muffled by the glass.
"I like to make my guests feel at home."
Leo grabbed a kitchen knife, ready to defend them. "Stay back," he shouted, but Roger just laughed.
"Come on now, there's no need for that,"
Roger said, his voice dripping with pure evil.
"I just want to play a little game."
Madison and Leo backed away, desperate to find a way out. They ran to the back door, only to find it locked from the outside. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped. Roger's footsteps grew louder as he approached the front door. The handle turned slowly and the door creaked open. Leo stood ready to fight, but Roger was stronger and faster than he looked. A struggle ensued, and Madison managed to slip past Roger and out the door. She ran blindly into the woods, the sound of Leo's shouts and the mad laughter echoing behind her. She didn't stop running until she reached a neighboring cabin where a kind old couple took her in and called the police. By the time they arrived, it was too late. The cabin was empty, and there was no sign of Leo or Roger. The police searched the area, but they found nothing. Madison was inconsolable, haunted by the memory of that night. Months later, the cabin was listed on Airbnb again, with a new owner and a fresh coat of paint. The reviews were glowing once more, praising the beautiful setting and the hospitality of the host. But Madison knew the truth. She knew that somewhere, out there in the woods, Roger was waiting for his next guests. And so if you ever find yourself looking for a quiet getaway, be careful. You never know who might be waiting for you.